everything we have been telling you over a year on this program. Now, like that, the FBI and the DOJ, like they lied about the FISA judge in that case, about the origins of the Clinton bought and paid for dossier full of Russian government propaganda. They used that to get a warrant to spy on a member of the Trump campaign. We will go through this Schiff memo point by point. We will separate fact from Democratic fiction. This is something the destroyed Trump media will never do. Also, the House Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes and Carter Page, the former Trump campaign advisor, at the center of all of this. They will both join us tonight with exclusive reaction. And also breaking tonight, growing calls for Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel to resign over new information about his department's repeated failures to stop and then properly respond to the Florida shooting. And according to new reports, a total of 4 officers did not enter the high school when they had an opportunity to confront the gunman and possibly save lives. We will describe in complete detail this bureaucratic failure and how every sign was missed that could have prevented, definitely could have prevented this tragedy. We'll have the very latest on that breaking news in a mini monologue. But first, we get started with our breaking news opening monologue tonight. All right, a lot of breaking news. We're going to go slow. A lot of details surrounding this Democratic memo put together by liberal, Trump-hating Congressman Adam Schiff. Now, we'll dissect this thing point by point. We'll give you all the information that the media won't tell you about. But before we get into all of those details, here is the biggest takeaway. Everything from a year ago that we have been uncovering and telling you about involving rampant FISA abuses, spying on the Trump campaign, has actually now been corroborated by the Democrats. Now, it's all true. The Schiff memo was supposed to take on the credibility and challenge the memo that Congressman Nunes put out. But in reality, the exact opposite is happening. Now, here's why. Facts are facts. The truth is the truth. Both Republicans and Democrats are now confirming that the completely unverified Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dossier filled with Russian lies made a large part of the FISA application that was used to then spy on a member of the Trump campaign. And here's another key point you have to consider. Have you noticed the near radio silence from fake news CNN, conspiracy TV, MSNBC when it comes to the Schiff memo? The liberal media, they're not talking about it because they know that it proves all of the key findings and facts of the Republican memos. And now that you have that important background information, let's dive into this Democratic memo. Here's what this Schiff memo corroborates. Just like the Nunes memo in the House, the Grassley-Graham memo in the Senate, they lay out the FBI, the DOJ, did in fact lie and misled a FISA judge about the fact that Hillary Clinton and the DNC that she controlled actually paid for the Russian dossier full of lies. Now, Schiff, he actually quotes a section of the FISA application in his memo. It reads that the DOJ disclosed that Christopher Steele was approached by an identified U.S. person who's indicated to Source One, Steele, that a U.S.-based law firm had hired the identified U.S. person to conduct research regarding candidate number one's ties to Russia, Trump. The identified U.S. person and source number one have long-standing business relationship. Now, the identified U.S. person hired source number one to conduct the research. The identified U.S. person never advised source number one as to the motivation behind the research into candidate one's, Trump's, ties to Russia. The FBI speculates the identified U.S. person was likely looking for information that could be used to discredit candidate number one's campaign. Now, Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign, the DNC, here's the shock. They're never mentioned. In other words, they are outright lying by omission. Slowly. In other words, it is an indisputable fact that the FBI, DOJ, lied to the FISA judge in order to get a warrant to spy on Trump campaign associate, he'll join us later, Carter Page. They purposefully and maliciously hid all ties to Clinton and the DNC because there's no way on this green earth that any FISA judge would ever have approved the application if, in fact, the judge knew that Clinton and the DNC paid over $12 million for a dossier to influence the election. And that last sentence about the FBI speculating about the purpose of the dossier, that's especially important because that indicates that the FBI and the DOJ, They knew about the political motivations behind the Russian paid-for dossier, and they used it anyway. Sound like a deep state? That key point has been proven, and it's undoubtedly true. Now, understand how profound this really is. You have the FBI, DOJ, they literally knew Hillary Clinton, her campaign, and the DNC she's controlling, that they paid for a dossier filled with Russian lies and Russian government lies. They covered up the fact before the FISA judge to get the warrant, and in the process, what are they really doing? They're shredding the Constitution, our Fourth Amendment protections. Schiff is also exposing himself to be a big fat liar. In this memo, he admits that the dossier had political motivations. But on February 2nd, after the Nunes memo came out, Schiff put out a statement. That statement reads in part, quote, "The majority suggests that the FBI failed to alert the court as to Mr. Steele's potential political motivations or the political motivations of those who hired him. But this is inaccurate." So Schiff is saying something that is an outright lie. Now, there's the proof. And here's the other key point. The Schiff memo is corroborating the Nunes and the Grassley-Graham memos because they expose how the dossier was the essential part of the FISA application. And if you look at the Grassley-Graham memo, it finds, quote, their words, the bulk of the FISA application consisted of the unverified Clinton bought and paid for dossier. Wow. Now Schiff tries to downplay the reliance on the phony dossier by writing in his memo that it only made up a narrow part of the FISA application. That, too, is a lie. And Schiff also writes that a specific section of the FISA application actually references the completely unverified claims in the dossier about Carter Page and June 2016, in the meetings that he had in Moscow. Page has denied over and over again it's never been confirmed. So Schiff is admitting that, contrary to his claims, the dossier did make up the bulk of the application to get the FISA warrant. Now, the Democrats' current position on the dossier, and look, they're trying to minimize it, is the complete opposite of what they were saying back in March during a congressional hearing. This is all politics. They're all liars, and they're all phony, and we've been right for a year now. Take a look at this.
According to Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer who is reportedly held in high regard by U.S. intelligence, Russian sources tell him that Page has also had a secret meeting with Igor Sechin. According to Steele's Russian sources, Page has offered brokerage fees by Sechin. Also, according to Steele's Russian sources, the campaign is offered documents damaging to Hillary Clinton. According to Steele, it was Manafort who chose Page to serve as a go-between for the Trump campaign and Russian interests.
My focus today is to explore how many claims within Steele's dossier are looking more and more likely as though they are accurate. The reputation of the author, Christopher Steele, as a former accomplished British intelligence officer with a career built on following Russia is important. This is not someone who doesn't know how to run a source and not someone without contacts.
They know better. Now, former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy and other legal experts are also pointing to a very key fact. In order to get the FISA warrant approved, because Page, Carter Page, he'll join us in a minute, is an American citizen, well, the FBI and the DOJ had to show that Page was acting as an agent of a foreign government and that his clandestine actions to help Russia were likely a violation of federal law. Now, as we have been reporting on, the dossier put the FISA warrant over the top. Without the dossier, they wouldn't have been able to get any judge to sign off on the warrant. We've also been telling you that the FISA application, remember, it was denied the first and probably the second time, but then the dossier was used to help win approval. As a matter of fact, it was the bulk of it, and it's probably why the Nunes memo says that the former deputy FBI director, Andrew McCabe, he testified without the dossier, a judge would never have granted a FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page. And by the way, they wouldn't have even tried for the FISA warrant. And speaking of McCabe, after the Nunes memo was released, Democrats accused Nunes of lying about McCabe's testimony on the dossier. Interesting. The Schiff memo doesn't offer up any evidence to refute that. Now, if Nunes was wrong, well, why didn't Schiff and the Democrats include a transcript about what McCabe said to prove the point? My sources tell me that McCabe said that and much more. Democrats didn't do it for the obvious reason, because the facts aren't on their side. Now, the Schiff memo also tries to make a big deal about Steele's credibility, given the fact that he had worked in the past with the FBI. Now, Schiff's trying to change the subject here and hide the fact that Steele used current and former Russian government sources in the dossier, and that none of the information, this is the important part, none of it was ever verified by the FBI. It was never verified by the Department of Justice, by Fusion GPS, which hired Steele. In other words, when getting a FISA warrant, the credibility of the person is not nearly as important as the credibility of the sources or where the information's coming from. And as we've been telling you, none of the information from Russian sources was ever corroborated. None of it. So Schiff and the Democrats clearly are trying to conceal this most important fact from you, the American people. Here's another key truth. The Schiff memo confirms about the two Republican memos. The GOP memos detail how the FISA application mentions that Yahoo News article written by Michael Isikoff about Carter Page. But what Schiff lies about is that Steele was the source for Isikoff and Yahoo News, which the FISA judge was not made aware of. He's like thinking these are two independent corroborating sources. No, one source, same person. And the Republican memos explain how the Yahoo News article was used to independently corroborate Steele's dossier as another source, but Steele was the only source. Another lie to the judge. And another yet key aspect of all this is the Schiff memo is admitting to be true, and that is that the former British spy, Christopher Steele, remember, why was he terminated as an FBI source? Oh, he was leaking to the media. And what Schiff and the Democrats conveniently leave out is that Steele lied to the FBI about talking to the press and bringing this information to them, which is why Senator Grassley and Senator Graham have made a criminal referral against Christopher Steele. The Schiff memo is full of other massive and outright lies as well. For example, Schiff falsely claims that Carter Page was never spied on while a member of the Trump campaign. That's not true, because with a FISA warrant, the federal government has the ability to access all of Page's old electronic communications, old emails, old text messages, old phone calls when he was a part of the Trump campaign. And that means that, yes, the FBI spied on the Trump campaign, and getting the warrant on Page allowed them to do it, which is why they lied to get the FISA warrant in the first place. And Page will join us and explain later on. Now, if the guy was a Russian spy, Carter Page, like the Schiff memo is claiming, why hasn't Carter Page been charged with the crime? And if the evidence against Page is so overwhelming, you know, that the FBI didn't need the phony dossier to get a warrant, again, just like Schiff and the Democrats are claiming, then why was it used? Now, Schiff writes that Carter Page actually talked to the FBI in March of 2016, so after the FBI got the dossier months later, why wouldn't they just go to talk to Page again and find out what he knew? He cooperated in March. Getting a FISA warrant on an American citizen is supposed to be the last resort. It should only be necessary when the foreign intelligence that the government is seeking cannot be obtained through normal investigative techniques. From what we now know, the FBI didn't get in contact with Page again when the Bureau apparently got their hands on the phony dossier in the fall of 2016, only months before the election. Now, why wouldn't the FBI do that when Page had already been cooperating? None of this makes sense. And then again, maybe it isn't supposed to, because the truth is finally coming out. Here's the bottom line. The FBI, top echelon, not rank and file, lied to a FISA judge about Clinton and the DNC. They never told the judge that she paid for these Russian lies in this dossier. That was then used to get a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. It is one, if not the biggest political scandal in our history. Here with reaction, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be back.
I am a bit stunned at the Schiff memo, and I guess there's a reason that many in the liberal media aren't covering it, because it corroborates so much of what you said. The Steele dossier, as the Grassley-Graham memo says, was the bulk of the information that the phony, unverified Russian Clinton bought and paid for Russian dossier. That was the bulk of the FISA warrant. That's now on the record, correct?
Yeah, that is the case, and not only that, it is basically the bulk of the entire investigation. It's what the Democrats have used over and over again. They've always went back to Carter Page. It wasn't until a couple weeks ago that they started to distance themselves from the dossier, which was their information that they paid for.
All right, and what's so important to me is, so Hillary, she bought and loves television. I mean, he's literally auditioning daily to be an MSNBC contributor. But the most glaring thing to me is it never mentions in his memo at all Clinton or the DNC, just like it was never told to the FISA judge. Now,
right. Yeah, that's our biggest problem from the beginning. Remember, this was only about FISA abuse. Phase one of our investigation was to say, look, FISA abuse occurred. And the reason that we wanted the Democratic memo out, if you recall, over 2 weeks ago, as soon as that was sent over to the White House, we're like, hey, we want it out. The White House came back. The FBI and DOJ said, hey, make the changes and get it back out. Well, then what you had is this supposed cover-up. They were blaming the president, saying the president wasn't getting this out. That was the farthest thing from the truth. They could have gotten this out 2 weeks ago. They could have made the redactions the FBI and DOJ wanted, and they could have gotten this out. And we wanted it out for precisely the reasons that you're mentioning tonight.
And the DOJ and the FBI never verified the Clinton bought and paid for dossier, although they knew it was political in nature, that she had paid for it. They never did their own verification.
Well, I think that's what's even more telling about the Democratic memo that we like, is that they actually say in there in the footnote, and they give you the verbatim, they go out of their way to actually say how this was used, how it was political, but then they don't say specifically who paid for it, which we can't, and we just can't have a FISA court. We can't have our intelligence agencies and our intelligence capabilities used to target one political party against another, and that's what happened here.
Isn't that lying by omission, sir?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, Sean, but clearly the way we see it, it was a lot more complicated to put what they put to put what the FBI and DOJ presented to the FISA court than it would have been just to say, look, here, Judge, this is who paid for it.
I guess the next thing I want to know is, so we've had allegation after allegation after allegation, Trump-Russia collusion. Is there any evidence to date of any Trump-Russia collusion of any kind that you or anybody on your committee or anybody in the FBI or Department of Justice or Robert Mueller's investigation has come up with that you have seen?
Not that I've seen. And the only collusion that I continue to say that I have seen and we have proof of is that the Democrats hired a British agent, former British agent, who went to supposed Russians to get dirt on the Trump campaign. I mean, it is collusion. It's clear collusion, and nobody's investigating it, and nobody's talking about it.
Are crimes, in your view, committed here in terms of the FISA application, the role of high-ranking, not rank and file, high-ranking FBI, DOJ, intelligence people? And what does it say about this whole year plus that this country has been consumed with an investigation that apparently has no evidence whatsoever? Should it go away?
Well, look, I think you have there's a variety of crimes that you'd have to look at. You have conspiracy would be the largest. It's also the hardest to prove. You have lying and misleading Congress. You have the court that could actually do something if they feel like they were lied to. But the bigger problem here, I think, over all of this, just FISA abuse specifically, is I just think the American public reject the idea that you can use a secret court, take political dirt from one party and use it against another. I think all Americans can agree with that.
Didn't Glenn Simpson also admit in testimony that, in fact, he never corroborated, he never verified, and at times, I believe it might have been the Senate, maybe not your committee, but I believe he also admitted that they had coordinated in terms of media outreach to get out information that was never verified, that was Clinton bought and paid for, that was connected to Russia?
Well, look, you have to assume, I mean, you know that Glenn Simpson and Steele were meeting with numerous reporters. And maybe this is why when I say the media is dead, maybe they're embarrassed, right? Because so many of them were briefed. Maybe they can't actually write about it because the emperor would have no clothes, right? It would be the height of hypocrisy if some of these reporters would come out and say, well, yeah, we were actually briefed on this dossier way back when. And, you know, now knowing that it's totally false and totally disproven, salacious and unverified.
Let me ask you this last question. You said this is phase one. At another point in an interview that we did together, you talked about at least 4 other phases. Can you outline what else is coming and the specific areas of interest that you have in terms of investigations?
Well, the area that we're focusing on right now is the State Department. If you look at the questionnaire that we've sent out, so we have a questionnaire that went out to current and former senior members at the highest levels of government, where we're asking them very simple questions about the dossier, when they knew about it, who they told, when they knew the Democrats had paid for it. That questionnaire is due this Friday.
Did you find Susan Rice's note to self on the final day of the Obama administration odd?
Well, I would say it is another example of a long string of actions by Susan Rice that I think are odd.
Does it scare you that an unverified, political, bought and paid for document full of Russian lies, with all the talk about Russia collusion, could make its way to a FISA court, that the FISA judge is not informed about its origins, and that it becomes the basis to spy on an opposition party in the lead up to an election? Does that scare you as much as it does me?
Well, Sean, let me tell you what scares me more than that. It's that the party who did that, okay, meaning the Democrats in the House and the Senate, whose party did this, that they're actually, and if you read the Democratic memo closely, they actually say that that's okay.
That's scary.
And that, to me, is really bad. It's not oversight, and I think it brings up many questions about when did they actually know about this dossier? When did they know it? It was actually their own dossier that they used to drum up an investigation on Republicans.
All right, Congressman, thank you. Keep up the good work. We need the truth. Sean. The American people deserve it. When we come back, we'll talk to Sarah Carter and Greg Jarrett. Also, an exclusive interview with Carter Page. He is mentioned extensively in the Schiff Democratic memo and much more. Straight ahead. All right, here to exclusively react to the Democrats' FISA memo, former Trump campaign associate Carter Page. How are you, sir?
Great to see you.
You're not a traitor to the country? You haven't? Let me give some background here so our audience understands. By the way, you're a naval graduate. You went to the Annapolis?
Yes.
And you were part of a foreign policy advisory council on the Trump campaign. They met once and you weren't there?
Yeah, I had a previous meeting scheduled with some top military leaders very far from Washington.
You never met Donald Trump? Never communicated with him in any way?
No. Okay,
and so you view yourself as a junior, unpaid advisor. Okay. You did speak at a commencement ceremony in Moscow at the New Economics School. By the way, President Obama spoke there, too?
I've spoken at a lot of universities in Moscow going back 15 years, but yeah, I was...
And you lived there. Why did you live in Moscow?
Because in 2004, Merrill Lynch was, they moved out in 1998 when the emerging markets crisis occurred, and so 2004 was the fastest growth market in the world, and so me and another guy went over to get the office going.
You admitted to lawmakers and anybody else that questioned you, and I won't ask you about it because I don't think you can talk about it, can you? Certain meetings you might have had, that while in Moscow you had brief encounters with people that may have been senior government officials.
I said hello. One of the other speakers at the New Economics School was a government official. I said hello as he was walking down the street off the stage.
That's the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia?
Yes.
10 seconds.
Not even. And I've been asking to try to get footage of that, and I've been asked about that in various interrogations, literally
in
for
all
hours.
Your time on the campaign or not on the campaign, did anybody in Russia ever suggest to you they had negative information on Hillary?
Not one word, nothing whatsoever, and not even a glimpse of an offer.
Anyone ever suggest to you in any way that there was a hacking that they were aware of?
Absolutely not. I heard about it in the news eventually.
You're identified a lot in this Steele dossier,
Yes.
Page 9 of it says that you held meetings with 2 Igors, Session and the president of the Russian energy giant, and Igor, I'm going to say it the wrong way, Dvatikin?
Dvatikin, yeah.
And senior, according to people, did that ever happen?
I had not even heard. I started when I heard the word Devyakin asked of me.
Devyakin, thank you.
They started calling me. Wall Street Journal was the first that called me in July of 2016, and I kept getting these calls from people for the next couple months until it finally broke in September.
Is anything in the Steele dossier written about you true?
Absolutely not a word.
Not one word.
Nope.
They're completely false.
It's a laughable joke. Absolutely.
I know Trey Gowdy asked you this. What factual inaccuracies stand out the most against you?
It's just the complete ridiculousness of it all, Sean. So.
Do you think you would have been charged by the special counsel now if they had any evidence, considering that FISA warrant gave them an opportunity to get every text, every email, every phone call you ever made? Wouldn't that have led to an indictment by now?
You know, I'm not, I don't talk about those things, but typically, if anyone would have, I've never been given any information that, I'm under any serious consideration, over recent months. So
I have no personal information the Russian government or anyone associated with it played a role in the 2016 election. You added that your visits to Moscow, you were never approached by any Russian in any way, shape, manner, or form. What do you make of the coverage in this country that has been for the last year, then, if that's true, what you said, because you said it under oath and you said it to the House Intelligence Committee?
Sean, in that context, I have to thank you, because you have been the Edward R. Murrow of this whole process. The
media's going to love that comment. Go ahead.
It's been so completely out of control, going back really a year and a half now. And so your team, they used to call it the Murrow Boys. Mm-hmm. Your team with Greg and Sarah and everyone. I mean, to dig through and actually get to the bottom of things. I mean, there's a lot of people. Has the country been lied to by the media and by Adam Schiff on a regular basis? It's been nonstop, absolutely. Well, and that's the funny thing about this, the memo from Saturday, is it's just a continuation of the same game the DNC has been playing since the summer of 2016. Do you know Michael Steele? Christopher Steele? Not Michael. Michael's my friend. Yeah. Never met him. Never met him. Yeah. Okay. The government, by the way, spied on you 4 different warrants for a full year. You know what they have on you. You know the emails that they were able to get. Is there anything that in any way would implicate you, in any way to associate yourself with Russians to impact elections of this country? I have no fear whatsoever. Although it's interesting, they have these, it's like Mad Libs on this memo, where they have, typically in Mad Libs, you have to put in a word and it comes out with a crazy saying, but here, it's already these crazy ideas in the 10-page memo, and then whatever's underneath in these blacked-out boxes, I'm sure would even be more crazy. So the interrogatories that in the case in Great Britain, Steele cast out on the truth of his own dossier? Big time, yeah, and actually, he. It's amazing how these defamation cases, myself. And you're suing? Absolutely. Who are you suing? I'm suing Oath Inc., which owns Yahoo News as well as Huffington Post. And, Yahoo News... Maybe others by the time this is all said and done? Well, it's interesting. If you look at this fake intel report of January 6, 2017, 2 weeks before the inauguration, attacking, really throwing up a lot of dirt on the incoming new administration and leaving open all these questions. There's 2 themes to it. One is the hacking, and we all know I've been hacked now, and the other is the fake news media. My lawsuit right now is focused on the fake news media, and I'm suing Broadcasting Board of Governors, which is the funder for Radio Free Europe. And we'll see. I've been back and forth with DOJ going back many months now, and so far they've been kicking and screaming. But, I think now that these, the truth comes out, they're going to be more cooperative. Carter Page, we'll have you back, and we appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for everything, Sean. Sarah Carter, Greg Jarrett, weigh in next. Stay with us. All right, joining us now, Fox News contributor, investigative reporter Sarah Carter, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. All right, a lot to respond to. Carter Page and Devin Nunes.
Adam Schiff insisted that once his memo came out, it would contradict everything in the Republican Nunes memo. It contradicts nothing, and in fact, it supports and corroborates everything in the Nunes memo. Schiff should be embarrassed and ashamed of himself for those representations. For example, he said the FBI and the Department of Justice followed the FISA laws, did everything properly. We now know that is completely untrue. They broke the FISA laws. Schiff said, well, the FISA court will show was properly advised about the political connections of Hillary Clinton. That's a lie, and his memo points out that he was lying about that. I mean, you go through every part of Schiff's memo, and it corroborates and supports Nunes' memo.
And that's the point. The Steele dossier was key, Sarah. No dossier, as McCabe said. No dossier, no FISA application, never mind warrant. They withheld that Clinton bought and paid for this thing. I mean, everything was corroborated that Nunes and the Grassley-Graham memo said. Everything they corroborate.
Absolutely, Sean, and they implicate themselves. This is the FBI director, former director James Comey, and others implicate themselves with their own words. If you think about the timeline, October 21st, 2016, they get the FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page. Then on January 5th, they debrief then President Obama. On January 6th, they brief President-elect Trump. And James Comey himself says, it's salacious, it's unverified. Then you have Christopher Steele himself telling the courts, he didn't verify anything in it. So everybody's using this dossier for a FISA. I mean, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment if they lied to the FISA courts.
And you broke this on this show almost a year ago. That's how long we've been unpeeling this onion. What do you think of Carter Page?
You got to feel sorry for a guy like Carter Page. I mean, he is completely innocent. There's no evidence to suggest that anything that is claimed in the dossier is true. And here's a guy whose reputation...
Wouldn't he have been charged by Mueller by now?
Oh, of course he would have. He would have been charged a long time ago.
He's not getting charged. You don't think it's happening?
And one of the things that the FBI should have done, under the FISA law they're required to do, go talk to the subject of the dossier, Carter Page. Did they ever do it? No. He would have sat them down and told them his whereabouts, who he talked to in his brief stay in Moscow where he's delivering a speech. And the FBI, if they had an ounce of brains, would have said, okay, this is obviously a fabricated dossier.
Sarah?
That is unless, Greg and Sean, that is unless they needed to open up this investigation into Carter Page because they were planning on doing it. And that's something that should be very concerning. I mean, they slandered Carter Page, and when Christopher Steele leaked information from the dossier to the media and